the pig run slower. Let the arrow fly. When the city lies bolder, I'll pluck out thine eye. Name your God and bleed the fringe. I'd like to say how you all would bleed for me. If you scorn my lover, Satan got your thigh. If you steal in hunger, I will kick you when you please stand for me. Name your God and bleed the freight. I'd like to say how you all would bleed for me.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today's date is Sunday, June 7th, 2026. The time is 1:03 p.m. and I, your host, Emmanuel I. Smith, am in bright and sunny Miami-Dade County, Florida. Thank you for viewing, thank you for listening, and thank you for your patronage. The topic of today's lecture is MK Ultra Part 8, More Public Germ Experimentation. And ladies and gentlemen, I tend to do these lectures outside, so please adjust your volumes accordingly, as I may need to raise or project my voice ever so often, typically to keep the background noise down. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed today's lecture, as I hope you enjoy all of the EIS Media Group lectures in the EIS Media Group lecture series. And the reason for this is because we're talking about the future of human civilization, really. I mean, secret societies have existed in the past. Secret police have existed in the past. These things probably exist now in various capacities. However, it's expedient and necessary to know what the effect these secret governmental auxiliaries, some call them shadow governments, have on society, have on the people, have on their demographics, have on the populations of the countries that are subjected to these matters. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look into Project MK Ultra, which was a program that ran from approximately 1950 to 1970 right here in the United States. Project MK Ultra is important to know about because it was the first program that was documented as having seen the U.S. Armed Forces in a co-op with the CIA to perform open-air experiments of a biological nature on U.S. citizens. Unsuspecting U.S. citizens who didn't know that they were test dummies for the United States federal government, and they didn't realize that. And these test subjects, particularly the ones who weren't told that they were test subjects for biological and chemical materials, these people weren't paid. You know, it wasn't a friendly neighborhood behavior experiment that was being run by your local psychologist. This was the U.S. Army using its resources and the CIA using its resources to essentially play God in the lives of hundreds of thousands of American citizens, with the expectation that these people would never find out who it was that slung those chemicals on them, that slung that bacteria in their face, that made them and their family, their whole neighborhood sick. That they would never find out who it was that orchestrated bacterial attacks on entire cities and states. They thought, well, maybe it was just a bug going around, or some of the more zealous citizens probably thought, oh my goodness, all these people getting sick all over the place. It must be the hand of God. It must be something God's doing. God must be angry with San Francisco. God must be angry with Hawaii. God must be angry with New York, Atlanta, Florida, Washington, D.C. All of these major cities that the U.S. Army in particular went to with aerosol cans full of bacteria, and under the guise of human experimentation, or rather human biological experimentation or human physiology experimentation, walked into these airports and bus stations all over the place with aerosol cans full of bacteria, and had them hidden in suitcases, and were just spraying people down in public places with these bacterial weapons. U.S. Army personnel, ladies and gentlemen, U.S. Army personnel in plain clothes. The same U.S. Army that you pay your tax dollars to, or that money comes out of your bi-weekly check to assist in their capacity as an armed services auxiliary. Okay, this same armed forces auxiliary, this same armed services auxiliary that your tax dollars goes to help with their domestic and foreign objectives, their domestic and foreign missions. This same U.S. Army will walk up to you in a bus stop with a plainclothes operative and spray you and your family down with an aerosol can full of bacteria, hidden inside of a suitcase. And then they leave. They don't stay to watch your reaction. They don't stay to watch the action. They spray you down. Okay, and then they walk off and go across the street to a restaurant and eat a bacon and egg sandwich or something, while you and your family are sitting there in the bus terminal or in the airport. Now you're bathed in bacteria, courtesy of the U.S. Army. Ladies and gentlemen, experiments like that happened in this country. Look it up. It's documented. It has been noted, and it is in the public record now, ladies and gentlemen. And, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, ladies and gentlemen, to be a citizen in a country that calls itself the land of the free and the home of the brave. The only thing free and brave in this situation is the freedom that the U.S. Army gave its undercover operatives to maneuver about airports with bacteria weapons. And the only thing brave that happened was the bravery of the U.S. citizens who withstood those bacterial attacks and survived them. So when you say the land of the free and the home of the brave, that's exactly what comes to mind, ladies and gentlemen: bacterial attacks. Why? Because they're difficult to trace. It's hard to know who it is that's infecting you. And your body suffers the effects of this attack over a period of days or weeks. And the perpetrator of the attack, the assailant, scurries off into the night like a cockroach, or scurries off into the day like a weasel, while you, the victim, your body now has to recover from these biological and bacterial attacks that have been leveled against you, not just by the U.S. Army. They got gang stalkers doing that stuff now. Okay, it doesn't have to be the U.S. Army anymore. It doesn't have to be the CIA anymore. They've gone out and recruited useful idiots across this country that are more than willing to take a signal to a targeted person's location and use either bodily functions to spread bacteria to them or bacterial weapons, like the U.S. Army used to do. I mean, history will judge. I mean, I guess when a country gets too comfortable with its national security capabilities, and when a country gets too comfortable with its populace or gets too comfortable, and when I say too comfortable, I'm talking about the ruling establishment in any country. They get too comfortable and too confident with their ability to alter the societies that they're in charge of. And some of them use very atrocious programs like MK Ultra, like Project Gang Stalking, to flex their muscle and show how much control they have over American society. So we're going to talk about some of this, ladies and gentlemen, today in depth. This is MK Ultra Part 8. More public germ spreading. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull talking points from a number of documents that I've pulled online. And I'm going to pull those documents up presently. All right. So I have a number of documents here from a number of news sources, and then I have some documents that I pulled off of the Google artificial intelligence program, which aggregates and summarizes information pulled from a number of credible websites and condenses them down into paragraphs for easy viewing and easy reading. So we're going to look at these news articles, and we're going to look at these artificial intelligence summaries, and we're going to have a discussion about MK Ultra today. We're going to have a discussion about government overreach. We're going to have a discussion about what it means for a country to essentially use germ warfare tactics on its citizens in order to test them. And we're going to look at the implications of that and what the long-term consequences of that are as well. So the first article we're going to look at is a Washington Post article that is dated 12th of December, 1984. And the title of this article is "Scientologists Expose Germ Warfare Testing on American Citizens." And this particular document was furnished by the Church of Scientology International, 316 Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast, Washington, D.C. 20003. Ladies and gentlemen, the Church of Scientology from the 1960s to probably the early 80s was a powerhouse in FOIA requests. The Church of Scientology probably found out more about the CIA, MK Ultra, and related programs in this 20-year period than any other private institution in the world. The Church of Scientology did tireless research on CIA activities throughout this country, and they submitted thousands upon thousands of FOIA requests to the U.S. federal government and its auxiliaries so we could obtain inside information on what the CIA and the U.S. Army were doing in this country, particularly with respect to testing biological agents and chemical agents on unsuspecting and unwitting U.S. citizens. So what we're going to do is we're going to read this article and take a look at it. It says in 1964 and in 1965, the U.S. Army conducted a series of open-air biological warfare tests in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and San Francisco. Army personnel conducting the tests used a potentially harmful bacterium, Bacillus subtilis, on hundreds of unsuspecting Americans. in National Airport in Washington and at Greyhound bus terminals in all 3 cities. The Church of Scientology recently exposed these experiments, documenting the dangers they pose to unwitting citizens in the form of respiratory infections, blood poisoning, and food poisoning. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop right there for just a second. What these biological tests show is that it is most definitely in the DNA of the American federal establishment to use harmful or even lethal experimentation procedures on United States citizens as unpaid test dummies. Okay, I don't want to be an unpaid test dummy for the U.S. federal government, but I have found myself in that very predicament because of the clandestine gang stalking mechanism that this country has unleashed upon me and so many others. And when I talk about MK Ultra, ladies and gentlemen, when I talk about Project Operation Chaos, okay, when I talk about the Stasi Zersetzung program and compare them all to gang stalking, it just goes to show, ladies and gentlemen, that programs like this have already existed in the past. You see, none of these programs are one of a kind. None of them. They are all duplicates of programs that have already run. And I guess some people in our CIA and U.S. Army in more recent times said, hey, wouldn't it be neat if we could perpetrate the Zersetzung on U.S. citizens in today's time? How unique and fascinating that would be. And not just to decompose the quality of their life, but we could make them sick as an added bonus to our work. That's what they'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen. We enjoy using the power that has been invested in us by the federal government of the U.S. as CIA operatives and as U.S. Army operatives to go out in public and just fling germs on people. Isn't that cool? Isn't that exciting? Isn't that adventurous to be able to use the power of the state to target people to throw germs on? Isn't that special? Isn't that what being an armed services member is all about? Waging war on your own country? Using germs, bacteria, organized mobbing elements, harmful surveillance, narco-terrorism. I mean, isn't that awesome that there are government agencies in this country that are able to use such harmful, nuanced government programs on U.S. citizens with no consequence at all? Well, that's where I come in, ladies and gentlemen. I think that stinks. And I'm going to pull up every document I can on every misgiving of a covert nature that the U.S. federal government has ever perpetrated against the American people, or people in other countries too. And I'm gonna put it online. I'm gonna put my postulations on these matters online for the whole world to hear. Okay, how's that for a response? Okay, so the next paragraph reads, in 1956, in another biological warfare experiment codenamed Operation Big City, personnel from the Central Intelligence Agency and the Army drove an automobile with specially adapted exhaust systems through the streets of New York for 5 straight days, spraying as a yet identified but apparently harmful biological warfare agent as they went. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop right there. You heard that correctly. In 1956, there was a biological experiment codenamed Operation Big City that the CIA ran and that the Army ran alongside it. And what they did was they drove a car with a special exhaust system, okay, through the streets of New York for not 1 day but 5 days. Now here's what was so interesting and sinister about this matter is, okay, so you had CIA operatives and U.S. Army operatives, probably U.S. Army Chemical Services Division. What they did was they modified a vehicle, okay, to have a duplicate exhaust system that sprayed bacteria in the air as it drove through the city. So this car was a bacteriological weapon, and it was driven through the streets of New York by the CIA and the U.S. Army. This car, I'm going to say it again for emphasis, and this happened here in the United States too. This car, ladies and gentlemen, and I, your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, would tell you different if things were different, but this is the way it is. This car, this vehicle, was wired and equipped with a tank inside the engine that was full of bacteria, a bacterial mist of some kind. This car was wired by the CIA and the U.S. Army of this country to spew this bacteria in the air as the car drove down the street, so that the bacteria could infect as many people as possible. I'm going to say that once more, ladies and gentlemen, because something like this is so bizarre and unusual. And something like this, people have not, so few people have heard of schemes like this, particularly in democratic governments. All right, it deserves re-emphasis. The CIA and the U.S. Army got together in 1956. Okay, they got together and they put together a car that had a compartment probably in the engine area, a separate compartment that held bacteria in probably a liquefied medium. And this car was wired to where, as you press the gas pedal and drive this car, the bacterial mist, it squirts out of the car and sprays the area in front of the car. This bacterial mist is sprayed from the car into the air as the car drives down the street. The CIA and the U.S. Army built a car that had liquefied bacteria in it. As the pedal was pressed, the bacteria was sprayed into the air around the car, spraying down men, women, and children who were pedestrians walking down the street with bacteria that is being emitted from this car that was specially built for no reason other than to get people sick. It's a bacterial weapon. All right. And they drove this car up and down the streets of New York for 5 days so as to get as many people sick as possible. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, just think about that for a second. The CIA and the U.S. Army got together and modified a car that had some sort of a liquefied bacterial substance in a separate compartment near the engine, and when the pedal was pressed, liquefied bacteria was sprayed outside of the car onto the pedestrians that walked down the street. This specialized bacteria car was used by both the CIA and the U.S. Army for 5 days straight, so as to infect as many U.S. citizens as possible in a human experimentation protocol. You mean to tell me that the government that authorized that is too upright and just to authorize organized mobbing? All right, think about it, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so the Church of Scientology traced the details of this experiment, documenting, among other things, how the test team members had protected themselves from the agent by installing a special addition to the tailpipe of the car, extending its length about an extra 1.5 feet. The car itself was repeatedly washed to get rid of what CIA documents described tersely as contamination. But the church found no such precautions were taken with the thousands of American citizens exposed to the agent. In the early 1970s, the CIA spent more than $150,000 to continue the manufacture and stockpiling of biological warfare weapons, despite a 1969 executive order banning the production of such weapons. Evidence gathered by the Church of Scientology indicated that the microorganisms mass-produced by the CIA in defiance of the presidential order included disease-producing agents such as B. abortus and P. tularensis, which produce oftentimes fatal illnesses resembling the dreaded plague. So apparently the CIA was, and this is about 15 years after this bacteria car they built, they started experimenting with the plague on American citizens, which is fatal. It's a fatal disease. The CIA was spraying people down with the plague 15 years after the bacterial car incident, and in spite of warnings from the president, President Nixon, despite warnings from him for the CIA to quit using biological agents on U.S. citizens, the CIA said, "Who the hell you think you are, President Nixon?" And they continued. All right, so yeah, it's kind of like a goal and an ambition of the CIA and the U.S. Army to use their resources not only to disrupt people but to harm people with illnesses. It's quite an unfortunate series of events, ladies and gentlemen. The next paragraph reads, through the years, often in the teeth of fierce opposition, the Church of Scientology has documented and exposed numerous other chemical and biological warfare tests conducted at the expense of unknowing American citizens. By its pioneering use of the Freedom of Information Act, the Church was able to show the enormous sums of money channeled by various government agencies into projects and actions that are tantamount to biological warfare attacks on America. The Church finds such actions by a government against its own citizens reprehensible. Our interest in this area stems from our concern for the safety and well-being of all Americans and the Church's long-standing commitment to the basic freedoms upon which the country was founded. Article 5 of the Bill of Rights guarantees that no American shall be deprived of life, liberty, nor property without the due process of law. This important right is in jeopardy when innocent citizens become victimized by government experiments. The Church has provided information and documentation to Congress, to the White House, and to the United Nations, calling for an end to chemical and biological warfare testing and stockpiling by all nations. Over the years, the Church has worked to free people from the harmful effects of toxic substances in the environment. Tens of thousands of persons have stated that they have been completely rehabilitated from drugs as a result of their association with the Church. Those who would poison the atmosphere of our cities and destroy the lives and well-being of Americans are enemies to the basic principles of freedom so important to the Church. The Church believes strongly that officials and agencies of the government must be held to account for their actions. When highly illegal acts are committed by persons in government, as in deadly biological warfare experiments, those responsible must be persecuted. The Church of Scientology will continue to expose instances of government criminality, despite the fact that such exposés have in the past triggered retaliation by those who are seeking to hide their criminal acts. We will not cease our demands for bringing to justice those who have perpetrated illegal acts. Our commitment is to freedom and to a civilization without insanity, without criminality, and without war. So what you saw, ladies and gentlemen, was the Church of Scientology's mission statement and their reasoning for investigating these bacteriological crimes that the CIA and the U.S. Army have perpetrated against the American people. They cite Article 5 of the Bill of Rights, and they cite that these experiments have no place in civil society. One could reasonably say that the Church of Scientology was at one time a champion for the obtaining of documents related to CIA and U.S. Army thuggery. So we're going to move on to the next article, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Baltimore Sun. The author of this article is Stephen J. Linton, and this article it's undated, so the date is not on it, but based on similar documents I've read in the past, it was probably written in the mid 1970s, probably around 1976. And the title is Biological Warfare Studied at the Hopkins, $1 million in research done in 11 years on defensive aspects. And the article reads, doctors at the Johns Hopkins University have done more than $1 million worth of research on biological warfare over the past 11 years, university officials acknowledged yesterday. However, the research was exclusively on methods of preventing and treating diseases caused by biological warfare. According to Dr. Leighton E. Clough, the Hopkins professor who headed the Biological Warfare Project, Dr. Clough, who is now chairman of the medical department of the University of Florida, explained that the Hopkins project stemmed from military contracts for research and investigation of the pathogenesis, prophylaxis, prevention, and treatment of infection. The existence of Hopkins studies in biological warfare was revealed in the January 13th issue of Science magazine. In an article on chemical and biological weapons, Eleanor Langer, a staff writer for the magazine, commented, between 1955 and 1963, the Johns Hopkins received over $1 million for work described as studies of actual or potential injuries or illnesses, studied on diseases of potential biological warfare significance, and evaluation of certain clinical and immunological responses to certain toxoids and vaccines. Hopkins reports that its work, which is continuing at a reduced level, produced no results published in open literature. The University of Pennsylvania has been racked with disputes in recent years over its engagement in biological warfare projects. There's a contract acknowledgement here. It says Bruce J. Patridge, Administrative Vice President at Johns Hopkins University, acknowledges that there was such a contract. So I'll stop there before I continue. So Johns Hopkins University is doing an expose on the number, or rather the dollar amount of research that has been done over the past 11 years on biological warfare. Now, I'm going to let you know something right now, ladies and gentlemen. That $1 million came from the CIA. The CIA paid Johns Hopkins University professors to do research on biological warfare. See, that's how the CIA did it. The CIA did not pay scientists to do work for it in the discovering of biological agents and their effects. The CIA went to hospitals, universities, and prisons, okay, and essentially did contracts with these companies through third parties, paying them up to $100,000 a year to do research on these matters. The University of Pennsylvania was another college that the CIA did business with through these third-party companies. The CIA paid the University of Pennsylvania probably $100,000 a year, its research program, in the form of a grant or a donation to do research on biological weapons and forward the information back to these third-party companies that the CIA were using as plants. So the CIA was able to get its biological warfare documentation done through hospitals, colleges, universities, psychiatric facilities, insane asylums, so many different avenues and mediums for this research that put Americans at risk. It put their lives at risk. It put their families' lives at risk. But they were seen as expendable assets. All right, expendable guinea pigs in a laboratory whose lives had no value outside of the data that the CIA and the U.S. Army was collecting from them from running these experiments on them. And apparently the University of Pennsylvania has gotten disputes, got into various disputes over its role in testing biological weapons, probably on campus. I mean, think about it. If you're a college and you test biological weapons on campus, you're putting the entire student body at risk. You're putting the faculty at risk. You're putting the whole community at risk. And that's just not acceptable. We'll continue on. The two Hopkins doctors most closely associated with the project are no longer at the university. Dr. Clough left Hopkins in 1966 for the University of Florida, and Dr. Ivan Bennett has taken a leave of absence to work as a federal scientific advisor in Washington. So these two doctors that assisted the CIA in making biological weapons found better jobs after the project ended. So as a thank you to these doctors for helping them discover uses and compounds for biological weapons, these doctors were essentially put into better, higher paying jobs probably with the CIA's help, in exchange for their material support in the biological warfare experiment project. So we'll continue on. H. Ridgely Warfield, director of the Institute for Cooperative Research at Hopkins, said that he believed the biological warfare research contract ran from 1953 to 1960. The next section is some continued. Some of that work has continued since, although in different contexts. So I'll stop right there. So from 1953 to the present, okay, this article was probably written around 1975. It was still continuing. These human experimentation modules that the CIA and the U.S. Army were using together, they're still using them 22 years later, even after President Richard Nixon told them to stop doing that. So you see how devoted they are to making people sick? It makes them feel powerful to know that they can use airborne bacteria, and not just airborne bacteria, but bacteria communicated in other ways as well, to make as many people sick as possible so they can use the sick population as a experiment control, and collect data from all the sicknesses that they themselves caused. Can you imagine the ego boost that these idiots had when they realized that they could secretly make large numbers of American citizens sick, ill, or diseased with absolutely no consequence whatsoever? And not only no consequence, but they're paid to do it by the same taxpayer that they're making sick? Can you imagine the sense of bravado and grandiose elation that the architects of that program must have felt, knowing that they were not only above the American people, that they were above American society, but they were above the actual law in America. They were able to essentially perpetrate acts of terrorism over and over and over and over again on the American people with no consequence or recourse at all. Okay, you take a car and you load a tailpipe and an engine with a mechanism to where as that car is driving down the street, bacteria is sprayed on pedestrians outside of the car purposely. And this was strong and harmful bacteria too. This was harmful bacteria they were spraying. Could you imagine being involved in that project and being able to say, not only did we get away with it, but we got a check from the U.S. federal establishment to perpetrate that against the American people? Can you imagine how self-inflated those people had to be? Going home that night to their families in probably a nice suburban house somewhere in a beautiful area. They live the ideal suburban life, the architects of this program. They're some of the highest paid members of the U.S. federal government. They work in secret so no one gets to criticize them. They live amazing lives. And on top of all that, they get to drive a car down the street. Not any street, not just any street, but Main Street, okay? New York City, Central Park, probably Manhattan. Okay, they probably went through all 5 boroughs, spraying bacteria on people with this bacteria car. And then they get to go home to an idyllic suburban life and go to sleep after probably taking a glass of Alka-Seltzer and waking up the next day and just going to work like that's all there is to it. Okay, that's how gang stalkers want to feel. Gang stalkers want to feel that way too. Gang stalkers want to be of the mindset, well, if we work 9 to 5 and we're paying taxes and we're contributing to society, then why not plug myself into a clandestine harassment mechanism? It makes my work week easier and more enjoyable, knowing that I can use the power of the state to take and receive signals, verbal commands, vehicular maneuvers, and other symbols and cues from other stalkers to point out targeted individuals so we can descend upon them like a pack of wild hyenas. We stalkers like getting people sick because it's a way of attacking our fellow Americans with no recourse. And that makes us feel better about ourselves. It's an ego boost to be able to take a signal to somebody and use bodily functions or hidden bacterial weapons to get them sick. All because some other stalker pointed them to me and said, that's the guy you do that to. These are acts of domestic terrorism, ladies and gentlemen. Just like that bacteria car was an act of domestic terrorism. Just like the U.S. Army dumping bacteria on San Francisco was an act of biological terrorism. Just like what the U.S. Army did in the airports and bus stations, spraying people down with bacteria in it arbitrarily was an act of domestic terrorism. The CIA using its resources to poison people with LSD without their knowledge. And MK Ultra was an act of domestic terrorism. Gang stalking fits that same mold. It is an act of domestic terrorism aimed at not only decomposing or corroding the quality of the life of somebody, but it's an active attack mechanism that obviously has military strategic functions. It's obvious. It's too organized. It's too synchronized. It's too well timed. It's obviously military actions. It's military thuggery. All right? Some people in the national security apparatus in this country post 9/11 got together and said, boy, did you see what those people did back in the 1960s with MK Ultra and Operation Chaos? And boy, I tell you, that Stasi Zersetzung that was running East Germany, boy, that was a real beauty, wasn't it? Can you imagine if we did something like that here in the United States? and grabbed society by the very hairs on their heads and steered them in the direction we want to, using our military as the anchor, that would make us be like the gods. We would be able to control society like a video game. Right? So they implemented gang stalking, and I don't know, 25 years later, they got busted by yours truly and exposed by me and others who saw through it. Period. It was a bad mistake to implement such a thing, especially because MK Ultra and the Zersettsung and all of these programs that gang stalking is modeled after, they all ended catastrophically. So what did the architects of gang stalking think was going to happen this time around? It was going to be a success? No. It has been proven time and again throughout history that organizing covert human experimentation programs is dumb. It's a stupid idea because it always gets found out and it always ends up making the perpetrators look like idiots. Furthermore, it causes a decrease in the morale of the population. It causes decreased patriotism, and it makes you look silly on the world stage. So why risk it? I have no idea, ladies and gentlemen. It just seems like a bad idea to use your own citizens as test experiments for harmful bacteria and psychological warfare tactics. So we will continue. We'll continue at examples noted. He cited a broad investigation of intensive immunization and studies of diseases including undulant fever, rabbit fever, and Q fever as examples of the project's research into problems that may be caused by biological warfare. Since the contract's expiration, the Hopkins has merely provided medical treatment for Fort Detrick employees. He said Dr. Bennett, who was on a 2-year leave of absence from his position as chairman of the pathology department at Hopkins, pointed out that the article in Science mistakenly learned that the Hopkins project secret. The whole project was unclassified, he declared. So it just goes to show, again, they're not just testing people walking up and sneezing on people. They are using that, but they're also using bacteriological weaponry as well. And this bacteriological weaponry contains horrible diseases like undulant fever, rabbit fever, and Q fever. And you best believe that these fevers were thrown at people out in the open throughout this country by the CIA and the U.S. Army under the guise of biological pathogen research. All right, so this next article, ladies and gentlemen, is the Washington Post, 17th of December, 1979. The author is Bill Richards. Report suggests CIA involvement in Florida illnesses. And ladies and gentlemen, this story is of unique importance to me as a Floridian because it's obvious to me that there are high quantities of bacteria being sprayed around this state by an agency or a government or a entity. And it's obvious that the patterns of sicknesses that people in the state of Florida experience are not random, they're not coincidental, and they're not happenstance. Okay? Florida illnesses in Florida, particularly of a bacterial or viral nature, are orchestrated and derived. Okay, it's people staging events using synchronization and civilian operatives, and it's a lot of things. And I think it's important for Floridians to know that there was a time in the history of the CIA of this country that it and the U.S. Army got together and said, hey, what would happen if we got together and went down into Florida and used various tactics at our disposal to spread whooping cough throughout the state of Florida? And the CIA and the U.S. Army got together in a meeting, and they had a back and forth, and apparently representatives from the CIA said, I think that's a wonderful idea. I mean, it would give us the opportunity to test biological substances for free on our own people. And if they work really good and they make a lot of people really, really sick, then we know that these biological weapons are good enough to use against our enemies abroad and in foreign places. So let's use them on our citizens first to see how well they work. Then we can store them, pack them in a biogen machine, multiply them greatly, make several tons of these bacteriological weapons, and dump them on our enemies if we ever have to go to war. But we need the American people as the test subject first. So, I mean, that's pretty much a summary of what happened, but I'm going to read this article. It says the CIA may have conducted open-air tests of whooping cough bacteria in Florida in the mid-1950s, when state medical records showed a whooping cough outbreak killed 12 people, according to a Church of Scientology analysis of agency records. So I'll stop right there again. This was another investigation that the Church of Scientology did on CIA activity, particularly that concerning the use of biological or chemical weapons. That was the Church of Scientology's go-to topic when doing research on CIA and U.S. Army hidden activities. What are these government auxiliaries doing with biological and chemical warfare agents? And why are they testing them on U.S. citizens? Okay, that was the Church of Scientology's whole thing. And they found lots of official documents directly from the CIA that showed that there were biological and chemical tests being done on U.S. citizens, despite the harm it could do to them. And it was the Church of Scientology saw that as disgusting, and they wanted to make it public, probably with the expectation that if it were exposed, it would stop. So I'm going to continue. The Scientologists said their examination of about 150 pages of financial records released in recent years by the Central Intelligence Agency indicates that the agency conducted at least one open-air biological test along Florida's Gulf Coast in 1955. In a report the Scientologists are scheduled to make today, the group said that the CIA documents show shortly before the test, someone in the agency signed out a specimen of whooping cough bacteria known as Haemophilus pertussis from the Army's Biological Warfare Center at Fort Detrick, Maryland. The bacteria was apparently used in tests conducted around the Tampa Bay area near Sebring, Florida. According to the Scientologist report, state medical records examined by the group show that the number of whooping cough cases recorded in Florida jumped from 339 and one death in 1954 to 1,080 sick and 12 deaths in 1955. So in just 1 year, we saw 700 more infections and 11 additional fatalities because of the CIA and the U.S. Army's joint task force into bacteria spreading. All right, so the next paragraph, it is our hope that the outbreak and the testing is a mere coincidence, Scientologists said. A spokesman for the CIA said the agency would have no comment on the report. And that's typical. The CIA never comments to the news media about its secret experiments and its secret operations. It never comments. Even when it gets exposed, it keeps its mouth shut for legal reasons and for political reasons. That's why nobody's saying anything about clandestine gang stalking right now throughout the country. It is an inconvenient truth, ladies and gentlemen. Now, that's not to say that there aren't any politicians or judges or Supreme Court staff members or news journalists, university professors and the like that aren't curious about gang stalking. Of course, they're curious about it. They're just not sure that they're ready to unleash this beast upon the American people. They're not sure what the consequence will be. And they're not sure if it's something that will help or hurt the country typically. So they stay silent on it because of fear of embarrassment, of shame, of disgrace. And then something like this has the capacity to make a big chunk of the American population look like useful idiots. And the politicians of this country don't want that. I want it because it'll help me get out of gang stalking faster, but that's neither here nor there at the present time, ladies and gentlemen. So similar tests were conducted in New York. All right, it's not saying how this whooping cough was spread, but what they probably did was they probably put whooping cough, they probably dumped a bunch of whooping cough in a giant water tank, and then they probably attached that water tank to the bottom of a plane, an airplane. And what they probably did was they probably they probably used the U.S. Army pilot to fly this plane over the state of Florida and just basically dumping this bacteria-infused water out of this airplane onto the people below. And I guess people would think, well, it's just raining or it's drizzling or it's sprinkling outside. It might be getting ready to rain, thinking that this water coming from above is just natural rain, but really it's being dumped on you out of an airplane, and it contains whooping cough. Okay, that's how I believe this whooping cough was spread throughout the state of Florida. It was spread through the air by dumping bacteria-infused water out of a plane onto the American citizens below. So the rest of this article talks about the documents that show that samples of whooping cough were pulled out of a CIA affiliated physician's office, and $4 was paid by the CIA for this whooping cough bacteria. And I mean, it's pretty much just that simple. The CIA and the U.S. Army went around Florida. They probably sprayed people with it using aerosol cans, but they also very likely dumped it on them out of a plane too. And there were probably other mechanisms by which this cough was spread. It was probably used in the more heavily populated areas in Tampa. I mean, it's a situation where the Scientologists checked Florida state medical records a year after this experiment happened, and it says that whooping cough cases jumped 300% that year. So yeah, governments experiment on their citizens. It's a real shame. It's a real shame. So what I'm going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is move on to the next document. We're going to move over into the artificial intelligence documents. All right, now these documents have been produced, this information has been produced to me by Google's artificial intelligence module, uh, and it's an aggregate of information that has been pulled from many websites into a condensed metadata that you can read on your phone. So we're going to read about some of these instances of U.S. military open-air biological warfare experiments, and we'll read through these modules and we'll do an examination and then close the lecture. Thank you for listening. Between 1949 and 1969, the U.S. military conducted over 200 secret open-air biological warfare experiments to test the vulnerability of American cities to potential bioweapon attacks. The government frequently used supposedly harmless bacteria. Through later research revealed these agents could cause serious health complications for vulnerable populations. So I think the number was 239. The U.S. military conducted 239 secret open-air biological warfare tests to see how powerful a biological agent was against the American people. So that's a 20-year period, 239 experiments. That's approximately 13 experiments a year in getting the American people sick. We will scroll down to the next portion. We got Operation Sea Spray 1950, and we're going to go through all of these. We got Operation Sea Spray, which was 1950s era, perhaps the most notorious instance. The U.S. Navy, and mind you, the U.S. Navy participated too. It wasn't just the U.S. Army, it wasn't just the CIA, the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force all helped out with human experimentation protocols, some of which caused illnesses and some of which caused fatalities in American citizens. And they used these protocols in other countries too, namely Canada. And I think they used some of these bacteria warfare experiments against the Australian people too, at some point from 1950 to 1970. So the Navy released Serratia marcescens, a bacterium that was believed to be benign. They basically found a way to use a machine to dump bacteria into the fog in San Francisco, and the intent was to simulate a biological attack. Residents were exposed to the aerosolized bacteria shortly after. 11 people were hospitalized with rare urinary tract and respiratory infections, including a man named Edward Nevin, who died from bacterial endocarditis. There was a Pentagon experiment in 1949 where operatives from the U.S. Army's Secret Special Operations Division released bacteria into the air handling system, the air handling system of the Pentagon, to test the vulnerability of the building's interior to airborne pathogens. So the U.S. Army dumped bacteria into the air vents. At the Pentagon to see if the building's interior was resistant to airborne pathogens. And I can promise you it wasn't, and I can also promise you a lot of Pentagon workers, staff members, officials got sick from that, and no accountability was had. And it was done under the guise of experimentation or biological experimentation, so that makes it all right, apparently. The next instance is the New York City subway in 1966, where agents dropped light bulbs filled with Bacillus globigii, a bacterium used as a surrogate for anthrax, ladies and gentlemen, onto the tracks of the New York City subway system. The goal was to see how many bacteria would spread via the movement of the trains and the subway's ventilation. So we have agents basically U.S. Army agents. What they did was they had the Army's Chemical Services Division basically did an experiment where they filled light bulbs. Okay, light bulbs, ladies and gentlemen. You know what a light bulb is. You screw a light bulb into the socket, and then you put a covering over it. Then you can flick the light switch on and off, and you got light bulbs. The U.S. Army was taking light bulbs, filling them with bacteria, and then smashing them onto the tracks of a New York subway station. So that when the train ran over the light bulbs and the bacteria that had already been emitted from the light bulb, the train running over the light bulbs would cause bacteria to spew all over the train station. Getting as many people sick as possible. The goal was to see how bacteria was spread during the movements of the trains and the subway's ventilation. So in other words, the U.S. Army and the CIA got together and said, let's dump bacteria on the subway tracks at the New York City subway, the most busy subway, the one where there's the most people that can carry the disease. And let's throw these light bulbs on the tracks. Some of them are going to break open and spread bacteria, but the ones that don't, when the train comes, it's going to run over these light bulbs, and the bacteria that's inside the light bulbs is going to squirt all over the train station. And then the ventilation in the train station, the air conditioning or the heating system, is going to blow the bacteria all around the place and infect as many people as possible with this anthrax surrogate. So we're going to move to the next module. It says large area coverage tests, 1957 and 1960s. During large area concept tests, the military dispersed microorganisms over massive swaths of the Midwest, including areas spanning from South Dakota to Minnesota and later from Ohio to Texas. Monitoring revealed that these particles could travel over 1,000 miles from the release port. Isn't that special? The military dispersed microorganisms over the Midwest. They went on the U.S. Military went on a bacteria road trip and went from South Dakota to Minnesota to Ohio to Texas. That's about a 1,500-mile bacteria road trip where they just went from state to state dumping bacteria in the air using devices. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you see, so this is possible. All right, state-sanctioned murder mechanisms are possible. State-sanctioned disease mechanisms are possible. State-sanctioned domestic terrorism is possible. State-sanctioned biological warfare is possible. State-sanctioned chemical warfare is possible. State-sanctioned gang stalking is possible, ladies and gentlemen. The U.S. needs to own up to it, take the embarrassment, and move on. The next we have Washington National Airport, 1965. Operatives simulated an assault by spreading bacteria throughout the airport's facilities. So in 1965, U.S. Armed Service operatives in plain clothes spread bacteria throughout the airport. I believe this was the instance where they used aerosol cans that were hidden in suitcases. Ladies and gentlemen, it begs the suspension of disbelief to believe that a country's U.S. Armed Services unit would do this, but they do it. And the same kinds of people that did this, that not only participated in this, but orchestrated and planned this, orchestrated and planned clandestine gang stalking, and these same knuckleheads are still doing the same kind of crap right here in the United States 61 years after the fact, ladies and gentlemen. All right, it boggles the mind. And this, again, yes, ladies and gentlemen, I am talking about clandestine gang stalking in an ever-changing world. All right, so we have consequences and context. Harmless misconceptions at the time Military officials oftentimes characterize these agents as harmless surrogates. However, Serratia marcescens is now known to cause serious infections, particularly in the immunocompromised individuals, the elderly, and those undergoing surgery. So, I mean, the U.S. Army was saying, well, these bacteria were spread and they're harmless, but that wasn't nothing but a bunch of donkey refuse. Yeah, these agents were harmful. They were very harmful, and they caused a lot of sickness and they caused fatalities. But them saying we thought these were harmless, that was a way to deflect accountability once these operations were exposed. You got operational secrecy. These tests were conducted without public knowledge or informed consent. That means that the governments of these cities had no idea, nor did the people of these cities have any idea what was going to happen. And the experiment remained classified from the public for 25 years. So we have coming up here the end of the program. In 1969, President Richard Nixon formally renounced the use of biological weapons and chemicals, leading to the termination of the military's offensive biological weapons research program. So, I mean, Richard Nixon called an end to it. The CIA and U.S. Army said, to hell with you, we're going to continue anyhow. This is too much fun. All right. Legal challenges. It talks about the San Francisco experiments. And the family of Edward Nevin sued the government. I think Edward Nevin was one of the people who lost his life as a result of these experiments. The family lost the lawsuit against the federal government because they could not prove that his sickness was caused by the U.S. Army or the CIA. That was obviously an attempt to protect the U.S. Army and the CIA from any recourse. Okay, he was in San Francisco during the time of the experiments. He came down with the exact disease they were spreading, and he passed away from it. What do you mean you ain't sure that the CIA or the U.S. Army was behind it? Of course they were. All right, so the next page. Okay, so the military's open-air biological test and the CIA's MK-Ultra program were distinct operations, but they were deeply interconnected through shared infrastructure, personnel, and institutional goals. So MK-Ultra and these open-air army experiments, these biological terrorist experiments, they occurred using the same set of data, the same information, the same resources, okay, the same know-how, the same networking infrastructure, and the same auspices. Okay, these programs ran parallel to each other, obviously as an auxiliary to one another. I mean, quite frankly, MK-Ultra influenced the Army's tests, and the Army's tests influenced MK-Ultra. They ran parallel next to each other. I just call them both MK-Ultra. I mean, they're so interconnected, and they're so dependent on each other that, you know, it's MK-Ultra any way you slice it. No need for technical judgments here. It's MK-Ultra. Okay, it's the testing of biological chemicals and biological agents and other kinds of chemicals on unwitting U.S. citizens. That's MK-Ultra. I'll talk about MK Search here. So MK Search, which was the successor to MK Ultra, was a joint project between the CIA and the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. It was specifically designed to develop and evaluate offensive use agents, which included biological, chemical, and radioactive materials, intended to basically control human behavior. So this MK Search, from what I understood it as, I understood it as a sub-project of MK Ultra, but this article says it was the successor. I mean, that's yet to be seen. But anyhow, this program, MK Search, involved not only biological and chemical weapons being used on U.S. citizens, it involved the use of radiological weapons as well. That's probably directed energy weapons, ultra low frequency weapons, microwave weapons, gamma ray weapons, spectrum ray weapons, the kind of weapons that cowards use to invisibly inflict pain upon people from a distance. And quite frankly, it's a favorite tactic of the stalkers here in South Florida. They use a lot of directed energy weapons here in South Florida on people. I don't know if that means that the gang stalkers here are more cowardly or more weaselly or more sissified than the stalkers in other cities or states. But the stalkers here use a lot of directed energy weapons against people. And I mean, it's just a cowardly way of invisibly inflicting pain because the person doesn't see the frequency, the ultra low frequencies that are being aimed at them through an ultra low frequency weapon. But you feel the pain in your body from these ultra low frequency weapons. And see my lectures on weapons technology and gang stalking. I believe that's the ideal population lecture. Okay, I talk about weapons technology and gang stalking. I talk a lot about the various, not only weapons used by stalkers in gang stalking campaigns, but I talk about a lot of the general technology as well that is used by stalkers against targets in gang stalking campaigns. So read that for a little more information on spectrum-based weapons, which exist, and I cite official sources in those lectures. Yeah, that all that research started in the mid 1960s. The U.S. Army and the CIA shared personnel during their experiments on human beings, using biological and chemical agents. One of the people that they shared was Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. This was the man who killed Dr. Frank Olson with LSD, having snuck it into his liquor bottle when Dr. Olson wasn't looking. That was an MK Ultra test that cost the U.S. $700,000 in restitution to the Olson family. We'll look at Unit 731. Unit 731 and paperclip the foundational knowledge for both biological warfare programs and certain aspects of chemical interrogation and brainwashing, oftentimes traced back to the post-World War II exploitation of German and Japanese research. The U.S. government acquired data from these programs, which provided a jump start for the military's biological tests and the CIA's human experimentation initiatives. So essentially, after World War II, the United States went into German and Japanese government buildings and went into their government archives and then went into their military archives, and they found biological and chemical experiments and interrogation techniques outlined in these military archives. And the U.S. used those documents as the foundational starting point for MK Ultra, ladies and gentlemen. So the primary objective was biological warfare tests, ladies and gentlemen. It was all over. It was San Francisco, New York, Washington, Minneapolis, St. Louis. I mean, they just wanted to know how many people they could get sick, how quickly. The military was trying to understand how a foreign adversary could infect a major U.S. city with a pathogen. So what did the U.S. military do? It attacked the American people in the same way that it thought that its foreign adversary might, just to see what the effect would be beforehand. It would be like a member of it would be like the member of the U.S. Air Force saying, or let's say a department in the U.S. Air Force saying, You know, we're scared that one of our foreign adversaries is going to drop a chemical bomb on a major U.S. city. So what we're going to do as the U.S. Air Force is we are going to drop a chemical bomb on any U.S. city, okay, beforehand. So we can see in advance what the harm will be to our people, right? It would be like the U.S. Navy saying, you know what, we're afraid that one of our foreign adversaries is going to do a cluster bomb attack on the United States. So what we're going to do as the U.S. Navy is we're going to attack a city with cluster bombs to see what the effect would be beforehand. So if one of our adversaries tried to do it, we would already know what we were in for, right? It would be like the U.S. Army saying, you know what, we're afraid that one of our foreign adversaries is going to launch an anthrax attack on a major U.S. city. So what we're going to do as the U.S. Army is we're going to launch a major anthrax attack on a U.S. city. So we'll know what the damage would be beforehand. So if a foreign adversary tried to attack a U.S. city with anthrax, we would know already what was happening and what we'd be in for, right? Yeah, that was their logic. Let's dump bacteria bombs on the American people. So in case one of our adversaries tries to do it, we'll be more ready for the attack because we will already have experienced it. That's exactly what the narrative was, ladies and gentlemen, and that's exactly what they did too, and that's documented fact. And that logic is documented in CIA documents, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, just what it goes to show is, you know, I've heard it all. Well, you know, government doesn't work for everybody. The law doesn't work for everybody. The Constitution doesn't work for everybody. The Bill of Rights don't work for everybody. There are going to be some citizens from time to time that fall through the cracks and end up getting pestered or terrorized by clandestine operations that originate in our departments of defense and justice. So ultimately, that's something that every U.S. citizen is just going to have to bite the bullet and take. Be a patriot. Understand that these things are an inevitability, and also understand that if you happen to befall an injury or an illness as a result of a program that is being run by the Departments of Defense or Justice, be a patriot. Don't complain about it. Don't make it known. Don't make a big deal out of it. Be a patriot and take it. You see, that's the narrative that people who experienced these programs were exposed to, and that's the narrative that targeted individuals are exposed to. I mean, I think part of gang stalking was to see which of these targets would come forward, which of these targets would keep their mouths shut, and which of these targets would just become overwhelmed and succumb to the pressure. Okay? I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm one of the targets that ain't going to take it lying down. Okay, I've already started the EIS Media Group lecture series, the Bible Discourses LLC discourse series. I've done quite a bit of research. I've posted all of my findings online in audio-visual content and in written documents. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, I'm on the right track to properly exposing this menace called clandestine gang stalking. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, it just goes to show whether you're a government or not, whether you're a big-time corporate entity or not, whether you're a well-established federal auxiliary or not, you have to respect the inalienable rights of your citizens if you want your country to run properly. If you don't respect the inalienable rights of your citizens, then you could get political dissidents, and your country could end up looking horrible. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you next lecture.